In recent human history, societal leaders have over a multitude of instances used propaganda as tools of gaining and preserving power. Propaganda is, according to the Encyclopedia of Britannica, the dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumors, half-truths, or lies to influence public opinion. Oftentimes, their implementation is to satisfy the dual motives of encouraging citizens to work as per the government's will and ensure the maintenance of control within their relevant populations. Not all propaganda has the purpose of perpetuating an iron grasp over their respective societies, but the ones focused on in this FOA have that exact motive. A series of propaganda initially created to give rise to the USSR during the Russian Revolution in 1917 and later fuel it. The propaganda was commissioned by the people in order to create the Soviet state after Bloody Sunday, a massacre of innocent civilians greatly blamed on the ruler at that time, the Tsar. The posters were designed by the top artists in order to develop a new and distinct aesthetic with the goal of invoking communist and empowering values towards the working class. Their later employment during and after World War I and World War II was with an altered purpose of ensuring political discipline and military enrollment, twisting the original message of the People's State in order to fulfill the government's rather ambitious agendas. An analysis will be conducted examining the nature and progression of these texts and the visual tools that help them achieve their goals. Initiating the analysis with the first text, the following is an early form of the people's propaganda created in order to unite the Western Russian middle class after the event of the October 18th massacre, a massacre of civilians occurring in the same year as Bloody Sunday. The text is formatted as a postcard, as often public opinion, especially that which goes against the government, was suppressed and sometimes outright censored in certain cases during the autocratic rule. Thus, alternate means of spreading the message of the text was the only way to unite the people. The text contains a visual portraying two citizens in the foreground who have been shot in the head, leading the reader to assume that it has been done by the soldiers in the background walking off towards the right. The Russian lettering on the top reads as the conclusion of the October 18th demonstration, referring to the massacre early on that day. The lack of color and significant detail here helps isolate the key components of the text, the two victims and the soldiers in the distance, in order to divert the reader's attention to these features. Taking into account that the text has the goal of uniting the people, it must reach out towards the audience in some shape or form, this case being emotion. The text does this not directly through the piece itself, but through the context and perspective it draws from. The October 18th massacre at this point is already widespread news and has angered the working class population. The artist, aware of existing feelings in the audience, decides not to invoke new ones, but to channel them towards a united cause. Depicting the victims as innocent through their harmless flags on the ground, symbolizing a nonviolent demonstration, and the perpetrators as unpunished, seeing them walk off into the distance unscathed, helps root the intended cause deep into the audience. It conveys to them that they were not only killed unjustly, but that no one paid for it, and in the eyes of the government, they mean nothing. What this does is create a drive for revenge and the necessity to prove their significance, and develop a united cause as per the goal of the text. And while this text is not an advertisement, it still appeals to the audience with the need for prominence, the need to be acknowledged and respected by the government. The following text was commissioned by Stalin in the wake of his reign over the country in order to rally the population to his side and gain their allegiance after the succession of the former leader, Lenin. In order to do this, Stalin attempted to resonate with the people, stating that he was in fact for the Union and its cause. Instead of trying to impose a new direction for the nation, Stalin found it best to get the people on his side by demonstrating that he was operating for them by adhering to the goals of the Soviet state to create and power a nation for the people. In doing so, Stalin became a red-starred figure of strength and willpower in the propaganda based on him, a figure for the people. The text consists of two key components, Stalin and the background. Stalin himself is portrayed as a large figure against the grand background. He stands taller than the long pike structures behind him, helping reinforce his immense size. Behind him is a sea of infantry, tanks, and cannons, all of them holding the red flag and following their new leader. The lack of color here helps isolate the reds of the piece representing the Soviet Union, emphasizing its role. The flag in the middle says, Stalin's spirit is strong and will make our country strong. The size Stalin is portrayed in helps reinforce the phrase in the text, representing him as a grand force among even the grand military of the USSR. When considering the goal of this piece, to prove that Stalin is for the people, the text is successful. The message that Stalin is in favor of the communist values of the Union can be conveyed quite easily. However, reinforcing such a message is a difficult task. In the eyes of the people, it won't matter if the new president is in favor of the Soviet state or not, if they are a weak leader. It could also be a cheap tactic to gain the support of the people whilst not in favor of the communist direction entirely. Showing Stalin to be a grand and prominent figure helps achieve this goal by removing the doubts that he may not be capable enough. Alongside this, the transparent message on the flag helps support this and nail the primary message of the text into the reader's mind. Stalin is strong, and so will be our country under his leadership. While his allegiance to the Union is only represented with the use of color and the stars and the towers in the background, it is enough to subconsciously get the reader to acknowledge such. The following text was used during the Second World War in order to recruit as many soldiers as possible for the upcoming conflict. At this point, Russia was a neutral player in the overall scheme but was wary of an attack from the West, as the Axis powers had already attacked a number of countries with no affiliation. A strong infantry count would be the best option, since the USSR lacked the technology that the West had in abundance. In order to accomplish this, artists were commissioned to create propaganda, convincing as many men as possible to join the army. The text is one such example, featuring a soldier in the foreground holding his automatic machine gun in the air courageously with the intent of bringing inspiration to the reader. Behind him is a plethora of rifles and smoke representing the firepower of the Union. In the background is an olden Eastern Nordic or Western Russian warrior with his weapon held high in the air, mirroring the soldier facing the enemy with a confident gaze. The warrior is separated from the setting through the stark color palette. The red helps differentiate the more outlandish aspects of the piece from the more realistic. At the top of the text, a line of Russian characters translated at the bottom speak directly to the reader and refer to them as a hero. The messages being conveyed here are those which have few roots in reality. This is made apparent by the implementation of weaponry such as the fully automatic machine gun held by the soldier not in Russian inventory in abundance, and more apparently the warrior in the background. The goal of the artist here is to shun the existing assumptions of war in the eyes of the people, as Russia was hit the hardest by World War I with over 6 million deaths recorded after the end of the conflict. The artist, rather than trying to erase these views, attempts to overwrite them with feelings of empowerment and glory. The soldier clearly represents these values through his grand stature compared to his surroundings, and raised arms symbolizing valiance. However, he is still accentuated by the Russian warrior in the background, figures commonly associated with such values in history books and folk tales, in order to convey the essential theme that war isn't all death and gloom as effectively as possible. Backing this up is a fleet of weaponry in the back, while mostly non-existent, describing the firepower Russia has to defend such values. This helps reinforce the feelings of glory and power being created by the piece so that they do not feel empty or appear as untruthful, although it is for the most part demonstrated later in the war. So what does this say about propaganda in the USSR from its early incarnation to World War II? It helps describe the core features of propaganda as a text and its potential to have altering core motives even whilst being the product of the same union. Propaganda is a means of text that has the purpose of reaching out to the people, but can do so in a variety of ways through various mediums and contents with different goals. It isn't restricted by the boundaries that most other texts are confined by. It can take many shapes and forms in order to serve the purpose employed by the state, thus allowing it to be one of the most creative text types. What we have learned is that propaganda is a greatly variable text that attempts to serve the cause of the leadership of the state, whatever that may be at that specific point in time.